It's the week ending Saturday, the 19th of March, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen the return of British-Iranian Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe after 6 years of imprisonment in Iran. Russia and Ukraine seemingly edging closer to compromise as shelling in Kyiv intensifies. And Netflix's The Power of the Dog winning Best Director and Best Film at this year's BAFTAs. But we're here to bring you some stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news, not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Ollie Mann. Let's unwrap the week. And joining me today from Money Week, it is Editor-in-Chief Merryn Somerset Webb, from The Economist, our favourite science correspondent, Alok Jha, and we welcome back the freelance one-woman digital powerhouse that is Suchandrika Chakrabarti. Merryn, you were last on the show in November 2020, and you've come rushing back to join our panel now you've got a book out. And very interesting it sounds too, so I'm going to let you plug that for 10 seconds. Go.
The book is called Share Power, and it's about how ordinary people can change the way capitalism works, how we can make capitalism work for all of us in a couple of very simple ways.
There we go. Now all we need is for John Stepek to write another book, and I'm sure he'll come running back too. Okay, Merryn, you are kicking us off today. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
The week that we all found out we have more money than we thought in Russia.
I'm very proud of American capitalism in the last week. When you see how many American companies who've walked away from their business in Russia,
yeah.
They did it because their employees were talking to them, their clients were talking to them. That's a great example of how we modify our behaviors. And this is the adaptability of American capitalism.
BlackRock chairman and CEO Larry Fink speaking to Fox Business last week. Merryn, he says there he's proud, but a lot of his clients might be nervous this week.
Yes, well, there's two things in this. What Larry was talking about there was about how lots of US companies have pulled out of Russia, and this is part of them coming good and saying, we're going to pull out of a country that doesn't work for us in a G way. The governance doesn't work. But there's another part of the story, which is that an awful lot of companies are obviously listed in Russia. Russia has its own stock market, and it's a reasonable part of the global investing community, right? But what most of us don't know is that via our pensions, if we hold passive investments, i.e. investments that track indices, we all own a tiny bit of Russia. So in most global indices, around 0.3, 0.4% of your money will be invested not in companies that operate in Russia that are listed elsewhere, but in companies that are directly listed in Russia and operating in Russia. So one of the numbers out this week is that BlackRock said they've lost around 17 billion on those securities directly.
And what are securities?
Oh, securities is a share. When we say securities, it's just another word for share, a share in a company.
And exposure literally means, as an investor, as someone with a pension, your likelihood of having those securities.
We hold those shares. So, if you ask most people, do you own shares in Russian companies? They will say, well, of course I don't. Of course I don't. Why would I do that? But actually, if they stop and they look at their portfolio, and the key thing to remember is that we all have, if we're in work in the UK at the moment, around 75% of us have equity portfolios. We don't know that we do. And because of our auto-enrollment pensions, we all have shares, and we will mostly own some type of global fund. Very often that global fund will be what we call passive. So it just owns a little bit of pretty much every equity there is one way or another. And if we have that, we have a small amount of our money directly in Russian companies.
Suchandrika.
BlackRock is not the only organisation exposed to Russia in terms of its finance. It looks like BlackRock has been the first one maybe to put a statement out there, but other groups understand that this is probably a good time to be saying we don't deal with the Russians. US banks and European banks are at huge risk as well. So amongst the US banks, you've got Citigroup, who's got the largest exposure. They've got about $10 billion in total exposure to Russia. And in a statement on Wednesday, they said they were continuing previously announced efforts to exit our consumer banking business in Russia. So that's quite a big statement from Citigroup. You've got Goldman Sachs, who are also winding down their exposure to Russian businesses, and they've got a credit exposure of $650 million in Russia as of December 2021. They're telling customers losses should be immaterial. So they're trying to kind of console people, but again, they're moving away as well. And JP Morgan Chase are another one. They've got roughly 160 staff in Moscow, and they say they're cutting ties with Russian businesses. European banks have even closer ties to Russia. Banks around Europe held around $84 billion in claims for Russian entities as of late February this year. So we're looking at the French bank Societe Generale, BNP Paribas is another one, $3 billion, and Deutsche Bank amounted to about $1.5 billion. And then last of all, Credit Suisse, $1.7 billion in exposure to Russian-linked entities. So the Swiss bank has been caught trying to shred evidence of its loans to Russian oligarchs. So that's a bit concerning.
Merin, when you hear that big long list of institutions, those sanctions that our governments have been talking about are supposed to be punishing Russia, aren't they? But you think about, most of the Russian government and the Russian army are going to be on set salaries from the state. It's sort of everyone else getting punished by them. It's people like you and me that have invested in these things.
Well, it's an interesting one. We haven't invested in great volumes in Russian equities directly, but all of us, of course, have some exposure, and then we have exposure to other companies that have businesses in Russia. And one of the really interesting things about all this is the extent to which we have delegated these decisions over how the companies in which we have invested behave to the big fund managers. So we're looking at, for example, the CEOs of companies like the really big companies in the US, the really big fund management companies, so BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard. We're looking at them to make these decisions for us. And if you come back to us and say, well, is it what we really want to pull out of Russia completely? So look, for example, at Shell and BP, both of whom are big fossil fuel companies. And of course, right now we need fossil fuels more than ever. And we have watched them effectively give away their Russian businesses. Now, that may be a good thing, it may be a bad thing, but these are things that have a huge impact on these companies as a whole. And we, the final shareholders, because remember that these companies are, in the end, owned by ordinary people like you and me. We own the shares. No one has come to us and say, is this what you wanted? Because actually the financial hit is reasonably large. Did you want to give this business away, or would you have preferred to keep it and see what happens over the next 5-10 years? And so there's all the things that are happening at the moment with this war are adding to the many questions that we must ask ourselves about how the corporate world should be run, and crucially, who should be the people to say how the corporate world should be run? Should it be company management? Should it be the big fund managers that technically own the shares? Or should it be us, the final beneficial owners of the shares, via our pensions, our ISAs, and our various other investments? And this seems to me to be the key question, possibly, of this year and of the next decade. Who has the beneficial rights of ownership?
I mean, Alok, that returns to what you were saying about people who do take an ethical interest. But obviously, Merin's a financial journalist and spends a lot of time thinking about this. Most people don't. I personally, at the moment, I'm freelance. I can only afford to put £100 a month into my pension. That's what I do. I do it because I can. I don't spend that much. I trust the institution that I give it to invest it the best they can. I haven't got time or knowledge to look into the detail. It's not made that easy for me to investigate where that money is going. Do we all need to smarten up?
Maybe a little bit, but I think that it's a tough ask to ask people with jobs or to look into the markets all by themselves. That's why you have financial advisors and all of that. And I think it's probably worth taking some advice from financial advisors and saying to them, this is how I want to invest. I want to make sure that none of my money goes to a fossil fuel company. I want to make sure that my money goes to only governments in this particular area. You can do that, and then you can leave it at that, and then your fund manager will only invest in those places. So you can do that much care about your investment. You don't have to go into actually buying shares yourself, and people do, but I don't think you should be worried about that. I'll take one issue on something you said earlier about, all the sanctions are meant to be punishing Russia, but they seem to be punishing us. I mean, they're not really punishing us. These are small amounts of money, first of all. And the country of Ukraine is suffering immensely, and perhaps this is just our way of contributing to that country not being completely subjugated, right? These are small amounts of money. This is a small amount of pain for us to pay a few pence extra. But these are the kinds of sort of ethical things that we can do to make sure that there's pressure on Russia to stop its actions. And of course, in the long term, investments always sort of rebound and you can refocus. So I don't think that people should think of it as a punishment upon themselves. They should think of it as perhaps some sort of contribution towards a more ethical goal.
And one of the things technology can do, Suchandra, is making it easier for us to see where our money is going. And yet it seems to me there's a bit of a deficit there. There are apps for banks that tell me exactly how much money I'm spending on energy, but I don't have something similar from my pension provider, making it really easy for me to opt in and out of various different pots.
Yeah, and you have to think that isn't there because the transparency wouldn't work for those banks. They don't particularly want us to know for definite what kind of investments they're making, perhaps, because part of how that system works is on risk, right? And how valuable shares are at a certain moment in time. And so if the general public also is aware of what's going on, surely that changes how the market works. So I don't think it's designed for us, the people who are putting money into the pension, to necessarily understand what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, Merryn, finally on this, and I realise it's partly the thesis of your book, which I'm going to ask you to distill again into about 20 seconds, but how? What's the mechanic for ordinary people to take more of an interest in this and be more aware and take more control?
Yeah. Every share comes with a vote. Right now, we delegate those votes to fund managers. We ask them to vote for us, and we assume that they will do so in a way that reflects our values or our needs. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. In the main, I would say that most people might feel that they don't. I mean, you said earlier, Ollie, that you only put £100 a month in, you're not very interested, you've got all sorts of other things on your mind. But I bet a lot of the stuff on your mind is complaining about the way big companies behave, right? I bet there's a lot of big companies you're not happy with, and I bet you spend a reasonable amount of time complaining about it with other people, big corporates. You know, they don't think about us, they're earning too much, they do this, they do that, big tech this, etc., fossil fuels this. You've got a lot to complain about, everyone has. But you don't just have to complain, because you are the beneficial owner of shares and you can find ways to use those votes. This is a technology issue. The fund managers have to find ways to come to us and ask us specifically how it is we want them to vote and how it is we want them to demand companies are managed. Now, the easiest way to start doing that is simply to write to your fund manager and say, I want to have some say over how you use my votes. Tell me how. More of us write, the more quickly they'll get that technology on stream.
Okay. Alok, I'm coming to you next after this. Alok, what do you think this week should be remembered for?
Oink, 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 screech, oink, 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 screech.
A pig. But is it happy, Alok?
I think that one probably wasn't, was it? So what's it actually trying to tell you? My story this week is to try and understand the emotions that pigs are trying to convey to you. Now, whether it's a farm or maybe you have a pet pig at home. So a group of scientists have gathered thousands of calls from more than 400 pigs and recorded them all and then tried to work out the emotional sort of content of the screeches and howls and all sorts of other things. Okay, when they're running or feeding or reuniting with their mothers or other mates in their litter, they tend to be shorter. They sort of make these short sort of grunts and sounds, and they're very consistent. As you might imagine, an unhappy pig sounds very bad. So, there are howls and things of distress when a pig is, inadvertently crushed by its mother, for example, which is apparently a thing that happens quite a lot for small baby pigs. And when it's awaiting slaughter, they know, and they squeal and howl. When it's hungry or fighting or surprised, the pigs seem to scream or squeal or bark. They trained an artificial intelligence algorithm to then be able to listen to pigs' calls and work out whether a pig is happy, sad, etc. What's it trying to tell you? And it's interesting. They found patterns. They found that they could tell whether a pig was happy or sad or worried or surprised.
And can AI then more effectively measure the emotion of a pig than a human being can? Because I think we'd feel uncomfortable thinking that AI might be able to do that for humans.
Well, yeah, it can, because what an AI basically is, in the most basic sense, whatever it's doing, it's just a pattern recognition. So it listens to thousands of calls. It's told that this type of call means this. When it hears a new call, it learns what that might be. So, for example, when it was introduced to a new pig making various different sounds, it could tell pretty much with 90% accuracy what the emotion of that pig was. And look, the AI tool here is really the smallest bit of this. It's not really that important. It's just a way of extending knowledge that farmers kind of already have about the way that their animals are behaving. And I guess what I suppose this debate is all about really is that we think of animal welfare as something about the physical health of animals, whether they're getting diseases, whether they're growing properly, whether they have space and all those things. But, this is kind of a way into the mental health of animals as well. And we don't really think about that too much. I mean, obviously farmers who live and breed these animals do know little bits about those sorts of things. But here's a tool that may allow you to just understand a bit more about the mental state of an animal. And I think that's got to be welcomed.
So, Chandrika, what's the advantage of knowing this?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? It seems like it's kind of standardizing pigs' emotions. And it all comes down to the Animal Sentience Bill that's in its third and final stage of reading in the House of Commons at the moment. So the Animal Sentience Bill will formally recognise animals as sentient beings in domestic law. The UK has a long history of improving the lives of animals. It's something we should be proud of. And this seems to be the latest stage in doing that.
This is part of what's been left behind by Brexit, isn't it? This is Britain trying to come up with a rule that's something the EU had.
Yeah, exactly. So the EU has kind of led the way. They recognised animal sentience in 2009 and come up with their own version of the sentience bill. And this technology will certainly help farmers and other people working with animals in these situations to kind of standardise and understand calls, grunts, etc., and put them into certain categories. Because I guess they'll be audited. People will be asking them, how are you running your place? And they'll have to show them.
Well, will it help farmers, Merrin? Because the whole of our agricultural system at the moment works on the principle that we acknowledge that animals are going to be unhappy about the slaughterhouse, but up to that point, their function as livestock can be justified because they're treated ethically. What if this science, as Alok was suggesting, can prove that they're not happy, that at every stage of the process they don't want to be in captivity? Where does that leave farmers then?
Well, I'm not sure that you're right, that it all works on the basis that animals are happy while in captivity. It works on the basis that we pretend that we think that they're happy in captivity.
Exactly.
I mean, we may find out that well-treated pigs are perfectly happy in captivity, and well-treated cows are perfectly happy in captivity. One of the things that we should remember is that UK does have a really great record of well, relatively speaking, of making animal welfare a priority, and we still do. We also have a really interesting agricultural industry in terms of the way that we treat and feed, particularly our cows and our sheep. We have a great pasture-led agricultural business, which should be producing premium meat for the global market. I think I feel quite strongly that is one of the post-Brexit opportunities for us should be that we can say, well, look, we have this very climate-friendly agricultural industry when it comes to particularly pasture-fed animals. So, that's something where we do have an advantage. Should we treat animals better? Always, always. We should be trying to find ways to treat animals better. And it's no secret to anybody that animals, particularly mammals, come with a high level of sentience. But does it change the moral defense of being omnivores/carnivores? I don't think it does, no.
I suppose the thrust of what I'm saying, though, Alok, is that it seems unlikely to me that it's going to be economically cheaper to make animals happier. If they can work out what makes animals happier, it seems likely that that's going to be, more land, more food, more fresh air, whatever. And that is going to be an extra burden for farmers, isn't it?
Well, maybe. Well, this is the whole point of science, is to answer questions you don't know the answer to. And I feel like, yes, in a sort of intuitive sense, it makes sense what you're saying. And here's a way of testing that.
Could it facilitate a kind of Dr. Dolittle situation, though, Alok? If this could be put into an app so I could understand what my cat is thinking, could I talk back to him?
Well, look, this is not about language. This is about emotions, right? So far, this is just about whether a pig is happy, sad, surprised. Is it distressed in some way? And I think that's one step. Now, if you're talking about language, well, pigs don't have language, so that's going to be difficult. But maybe cats can recognize things. I don't know. Dogs can probably recognize certain words as long as it's its own name or something. I think that we're a long way from actually communicating with animals in any sort of meaningful way.
But it might challenge what we think about our pets, mightn't it, Suchandrika? Because there's this thing about purring, isn't there? To take cats, for example. I understand from reading books about cats that basically purring is something they've developed for humans, and it means they need human attention. But it might mean they've just been hit by a car. It doesn't necessarily mean they're happy. But cat owners just take it to mean, I'm happy.
Yeah, it's about having an emotional bond with an animal, isn't it? As Alok said, this is about emotions. But we need to have a certain kind of language to convey those emotions, right? So with your cat, you do feel there's a certain body language, a certain kind of sound language that they have that you understand and you get used to them. Part of having a pet and part of having any animals around the house is feeling emotionally linked to them and that you can nurture them and care for them when they're not okay. So I think people will be very interested. And going beyond that, I think this is an idea I first saw in The Simpsons, but surely people want to decode the cries of babies. That'll be where it would go next.
Yeah, technologically, Merrin, some companies would be interested in this, wouldn't they? If they had AI that really could accurately decode how people were emotionally feeling, they'd be interested in that technology. But it feels like a breach of your rights, doesn't it? In a way, you should be able to conceal how you're feeling and put that into communication.
Well, that already exists. Big companies know how we feel. They know how we feel from what we look up on the internet, from what we buy, from what we talk about, etc. It's ridiculous to think that the computers we're all sitting in front of us right now don't already have a fairly intense insight into our emotional state. I mean, I can tell you just from looking at the ads that pop up on my Safari that somebody knows what I'm thinking.
Okay, so Chandrika, you're next after this. And so, Chandrika, you're finishing the show. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
A question posed on Twitter was repeated around the world.
Definitely wheels.
I'm saying doors.
It can't possibly. Does a cupboard count as a door? It's a door, isn't it?
Doors.
I think it's doors.
The cars have doors.
Yeah.
There you go then.
Crystal Palace FC players discussing the hot issue of the day on their YouTube channel. So, Chandrika, wheels or doors? What's the story?
So, I'm really sorry to start a sentence this way, but there was a thing on Twitter and it went viral. So a New Zealander called Ryan Nixon was watching sport on a Saturday night. He was bored and he tweeted, "My mates and I are having the stupidest debate and I'm here for it. So do people think there are more doors or wheels in the world?" And he had a poll and 46.4% said doors, 53.6% said wheels, nearly 250,000 votes, which is a lot.
That is a lot.
Yeah, he went viral. It's the biggest thing he's ever had on his Twitter account. I think.
Yeah, because he's got like 1,500 followers or something, hasn't he? It's not a big account.
Yeah, so it's surprising to have that level. So there was this real interest, and it went offline as well. As we heard, footballers are talking about it. It was big on TikTok. These conversations are happening everywhere. And it seems like such a strange decision to make that you could never really go and check out. There's no way to figure it out.
Well, people have tried, haven't there? I've seen sort of, mathematical equations and formulas trying to get to the bottom of this scientifically. That must stress you out, doesn't it, Alok? I mean, people trying to come up with a scientific answer to a question that is entirely unscientific, or a methodology that is.
I mean, the mathematics of virality is very well established, as we know from the last couple of years. It's called epidemiology, and it works.
It's also quite liberating, isn't it, Merrin, to participate in something that is purely for entertainment and doesn't have a resolvable answer that can be contradicted. I mean, you're sharing opinions on something that can't really be challenged with fact on a platform where all day long there's news and depressing stuff.
That is absolutely the key. This is about the most equal debate you can possibly have. There's no need for any cultural knowledge or information here. There's no need for any educational background. There's no need to have any backup stats of any kind whatsoever. There is no answer, and so it can be discussed entirely based on your personal experience, and for once your personal experience is as valid as anybody else's, right? I mean, interestingly, the conversation my daughter and I had in the car the entire way to school earlier in the week, before I even knew it was a viral thing. We're just driving along and she says to me, "Mum, do you think there are more doors or wheels in the world?"
Wow, so it hit you virally without you even knowing,
Without
offline.
me even knowing. And the answer, by the way, is definitely wheels.
Yeah,
Do
I
you
agree.
agree,
It's
Alok?
wheels.
Have you looked into
Yeah, it's
this?
wheels.
Here goes.
It's wheels. It's got to be wheels because every door has a hinge, at least one hinge, and they're all wheels basically. So however many doors you've got, you multiply by the 2, you get the wheels. I just don't understand why anyone thinks it's doors.
So interestingly, I feel like doors is the first thing people often say if they just answer, but then people tend to change their idea to wheels. And I guess it's if you think wheels can be cogs. So I think that's the argument that Alok certainly had, which is,
Right.
are cogs wheels? And I guess they are.
Well, of course they are.
Okay.
What are they if they're not
Enough.
wheels? They're not doors, are they?
What is the common thread, do you think, Sir Chandrika, between stories like this that go viral and other ones that we've seen? So it is a bit like the blue gold dress, isn't it? Or how would dogs wear trousers?
Yeah. So when it's something like that, which is it's almost like a child's question, isn't it? Or with the blue and gold dress, it's almost like a magic eye experiment. And so it's like, why have these things taken off over other things? And firstly, they're really visual. Like with the dresses, it was 2 pictures. But even with the wheels and the doors, you immediately start thinking. You start thinking of a car. You start counting the doors and the wheels. It depends if it's a 2-door or 4-door. And you start thinking of other things that have wheels and doors, and your mind starts exploding. But there are sort of like a couple of general things about human psychology that link into virality. And it's things that companies can use on us, as Marion mentioned in the last story. They're using them on us right now, probably to find out what we like. But firstly, you want like the reader or the person receiving the tweet or whatever it is to feel an intense emotional connection to it. So to feel anger, joy, whatever it is. Anger is often rewarded by a lot of algorithms, as we know. That's kind of an issue. So what does it make them feel? That's really important. And then you want people to be reporting this piece of information, so retweeting it, putting it in their Instagram stories, making a TikTok about it. So why would they tell someone else this piece of information? Is it prestigious to know this information? Are they the first? Do they get to kind of lord it over someone by saying, you don't know how many doors or wheels there are, but I've had to think and I think it's this. So it's arriving like a messenger with something really important for other people. And then finally, you want something new, but new in terms of being a variation on the old. So make it new, but still graspable within a few seconds. If it's way too new, it's too difficult for people to get and they'll scroll past it. And if it's old, then it feels like common sense. Yeah, I knew that. Why are you telling me this? So you want a mix of those things. And that's generally the formula for virality.
I mean, Merrin, corporately, other people will be buying into the kind of advice that Chandrika gave about here's the formula, here's how you can do it to get yourself a viral sensation. But it's obviously not that easy to come up with this stuff.
No, it's really hard. I mean, you have these rules, but, nobody knows exactly what's going to take off. And you see it. I mean, if you watch Twitter or you watch any of the social media, you see endlessly companies attempting to make things go viral. But, if things aren't organically created, it's really hard for them to do. You can't create an amusing bit of passion in a laboratory. It doesn't work like that. There's a human element on top of it. So it's a real challenge for corporates. Even if they have a set of 5 rules, they can't come up with wheels versus doors.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, Alok, how also when people sense the promotional element, when people sense that it's all about directing you to a hyperlink, they're less inclined to get involved.
100%, and especially in Britain, as we're cynical about everything and don't want to be involved in that sort of stuff. That's it, sort of hardwired into our DNA, isn't it? It always amuses me when companies sort of sell seminars on how to go viral. It's like, no one knows how to go viral. That's like the most ridiculous thing in the world.
Okay, so Chandrika, finally, Alok has just said that what you said is the most ridiculous thing in the world. Do you have a counter to that? What is the learning from this story?
I don't think he actually completely said that, but I think he's correct in that you can't look forward into the future and say this piece of content will go viral. I think having that intentionality already kills it. But what you can do, and where I got those rules from, is from looking backwards and looking at what did well and trying to find what was common to all of those things. And it's the things I mentioned, but it's also surprise. You can't beg people to love that piece of content. They're not gonna go for it. It has to be just, I'm surprised by how much I enjoy this, or surprised by how much people are jumping on this. That's the last bit of it, and you can't plan for it.
Well, what almost never goes viral is this show, and yet I'm sure you'll agree we've proven its value once again. My thanks to Merrin, Chandrika and Alok for their stories. We will be back next week, and remember you can follow this show for free and get every episode as soon as it's released. Just search for The Week Unwrapped wherever you get your podcasts. Oh, and by the way, if you're looking for something else to listen to right now, then why not check out the week's new podcast, The Overview. I've been Ollie Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer Lauren Armstrong Carter at Rethink Audio. And until we meet again to unwrap next week, bye-bye.